on the Brawn Grand Prix season as we go through, because obviously you're building towards something. Everyone's probably on the same page thinking, 2009 is going to be a good season. Then, of course, we have the financial crisis, we have the crash, and Ross Brawn and Nick Fry, who was the CEO at the time.
Yep.
They're called into an office it was by Heathrow Airport, wasn't it?
It was a hotel at Heathrow, yeah.
Because obviously it's now been documented in the Keanu Reeves documentary about Brawn Grand Prix, and they're told that everything's got to stop. Honda's pulling out, and actually they're pulling out. I mean, there was no. It was pretty much a fait accompli, and famously Ross Brawn and Nick Fry say, well, no, actually you can't do that within UK legislation. They brought themselves some time.
Yeah.
But let's talk about that. Obviously, you were very close to Ross because you were his EA at the time.
Yeah.
But even you must have seen someone coming out of a meeting and going, oh, wow, I didn't see that one coming. What did they do then? How did that, you've got leadership in a crisis there.
Yeah.
How did that develop, and how did they then tell these people that have been focusing towards 2009 that there might not be a 2009, or we've got to fight very hard for there to be a 2009?
Yeah. Well, I mean, just going back to the morning that we found out about it, as you said, we really hadn't seen it coming. We'd had a message from Honda to say that the Honda executives would be in London at Heathrow Airport, that they were flying in and that they wanted to see Ross and Nick. And I think at that time we thought they would be asking us to make budget cuts. There was very much that sense. Obviously, we knew that the times were tough. We knew that they were closing their car plant. We knew that the economic crisis had really hit the automotive industry quite hard. And so we sort of prepared, and Ross and Nick were prepared with a whole raft of proposals to cut the budgets, and that's what they went into that meeting with. And I remember that morning really well, because it was also the morning that we were due to have one of the technical working group meetings. So this was sort of the FOTA group, as it was at the time, and Ross was chairing the technical working group. And that was also at Heathrow that morning. So the plan was he was going to go to the Honda meeting, have that Honda meeting, and then he would go on to the technical meeting. And I was driving down to Heathrow to join him to minute the technical meeting, which is something that I always used to do. And I was literally in the car driving to Heathrow, and I got a phone call from him to say, I'm not going to make the technical meeting. There's serious stuff going down with Honda here. Can you just find somebody else to chair the technical meeting for me? And I'll, come and find me afterwards, and I'll tell you what's going on. I was like, what on earth is happening? So I remember going into that technical meeting and asking Pat Simmons if he would chair it, please, because Ross wasn't coming. And that was fun, because I was trying to figure out which of the senior technical people in the room should I ask. There was every team was there. But yeah, Pat kindly stepped up and chaired the meeting for us. And then after the meeting, I went round to the other hotel where Ross was in with Honda and sat outside in the car. And then he came out when he had a break, so that I could give him all his paperwork for the day. And he basically told me what had happened. And I just remember being absolutely stunned. We just hadn't seen it coming. And it was a really crazy time. It was nearly Christmas. We were heading into, we were in an economic recession. So people, if we had to close the team, weren't going to be able to find jobs. I remember the day after the meeting with Honda was the day of the children's Christmas party at Honda, which I'd had a hand in organising. And I remember looking around the room at all of these families and their children having a great Christmas party, thinking, and nobody knew at that point in time, apart from one or two people, in the senior leadership team. And I was just thinking, everyone here is going to lose their jobs. This is just horrific. But yeah, Ross and Nick were, as you said, were adamant. that we were going to try and do everything that we possibly could to keep the team going. We had 750 people depending on us. We knew, as you said, we built this car throughout the 2008 season, which we thought would be a good car. All the data seemed to indicate that it was going to be a good car. We were just determined to keep going on a day-to-day basis and get that car to the first race. And we were really fortunate. We had incredible support from the other teams. I think, as you saw in the documentary, if they'd known
hindsight
at that time, perhaps they wouldn't have been so supportive. But they were. And people like Martin Whitmarsh and the Ferrari team came forward and supported, offered us engines. Norbert Haug was incredibly supportive, so we got the Mercedes engine. The drivers were fully on board. We didn't lose Jensen or Rubens, and we had incredible support from the team, from their families, from the fans. But we knew it was going to be hard, and that was, I think, one of the biggest challenges in terms of you're talking about leadership, communication. It was about how do we keep everybody focused? How do we keep them all on track? How do we ask them to go above and beyond on a daily basis when they don't actually know whether they're going to have a job at the end of it?
And what did you see from that in terms of with your background within internal communications? What did you see that worked really well there in terms of, because some things, and I've seen this in situations within my own career and HR background, there's stuff going on that people don't necessarily need or indeed want to know about, but they've still got to be communicated to. So what was the team that was becoming Brawn Grand Prix? How were you communicating to them? How were you keeping them up to date by telling them what they needed to know? Not necessarily, it's because again, what's obviously something that I've never experienced in my career going through change situations is the external scrutiny, because these people potentially could pick up a copy of Autosport and read wild gossip and rumor, and of course not just Autosport, the internet at the time in 2009 was pretty rife as well. So how were you managing those expectations from people when they walked in and said, well, I've just heard we're going to be taken over by, obviously Richard Branson was someone who was involved, but there were others as well. What was that like to not cause unrest and change?
I mean, I think, as you said, it was a crisis management scenario. The first few weeks after Honda pulled out, we really had to make sure that we were communicating incredibly well within the team. We needed to make sure that the team had the right mindset going into the winter, and we didn't need anyone to panic, because we needed people to stay with us and not jump ship. And so I think the thing that we did was to manage how we communicated, and the first thing was to keep things very, very quiet for like 2 or 3 days after the initial meeting with Honda, so that we could analyze the situation. And Ross and Nick and the senior leadership team, Caroline and Nigel and those guys, we really locked it down to kind of a small handful of people for a couple of days to keep the news really confidential and take stock and gather the information and just put a bit of a plan in place for the next few days. But then within a week, Ross called the whole team together in the factory for a big team gathering and basically gave everybody the news. And we wanted to make sure that, we communicated internally before anything was communicated externally. So Honda were planning on having a press conference that following morning. So we needed to make sure everybody had heard the news from Ross, first of all. And then I think it was really about how we communicated it. So Ross, if for people that know him, you'll know that he's very calm and very unflappable and kind kind of on a level, and he's also very open and very honest. And so he brought that. He was honest, he was open, he explained what had happened, he admitted that the senior leadership team didn't have all the answers at that stage, that they were still working through the options, but we just wanted to make sure everybody knew the facts, you know, that yes, there could be redundancies, yes, you know, we would do everything in our power to keep the team going. And then he was really clear about the next steps and what needed to happen. And that was, I think, kind of, it helped to focus people. You know, we need to find a new engine. We need to redesign the car to make it fit. So that means, like, you know, the whole team is going to have to work together to get that done over the winter to give us any chance of succeeding. And it was those sort of concrete steps really focused people on, okay, so what is it that I need to go and do now? And we saw really, you know, even after that meeting, people just getting back to work and going down to the race base to look at the car, to think about, okay, well, what are we going to need to change? And I think also he was just really honest. You know, it was a really powerful, straightforward sort of speech that he gave. At one point, I really remember, and I think they captured it really well in the documentary as well. You know, he asked the team if he just sort of said, is everybody here prepared to fight for this? And everybody just shouted yes. So it was that kind of building that momentum of, right, we're in a battle here. We have got to fight for our lives. And that was, and it really brought out the Dunkirk spirit, I think, you know, sort of everybody thought, right, we're up against a wall here. If we don't come out fighting, we're dead. And so they just kind of got on with it. And then I think after that meeting, the important thing was that we really kept the communication coming. So, you know, the leadership team like Ross and Nick Fry really made themselves available to the team. They walked the floor, they talked to people. People could come and ask some questions, share ideas, make suggestions. Everything was really open and honest. Jensen came to the factory the following day. He again took time to walk around and talk to everybody, make them aware that, you know, he was in the same situation as the rest of us, and he had no intention of leaving the team. He'd be with us all the way. So it was really about that sort of creating that regular drumbeat of communication throughout the whole year, where we honestly and openly shared what's going on, so that everybody knew where they stood, everybody knew what was coming next. And when we got to that stage where we did have to start making redundancies, and we made 250 people redundant, it wasn't a shock, because people knew it was coming. They didn't maybe know that it was going to be them. You know, and so obviously individually there was a certain amount of, okay, it's me, that's not great, you know, I don't know how I'm going to deal with this or whatever. But when people were made redundant, it was a case, you know, of giving them the best package that we could. And because they knew that that was coming potentially, it wasn't out of the blue. And I think that really helped us to keep everybody on track and keep everybody pushing. But it was a roller coaster. It was an absolute roller coaster of emotions, of, you know, of exhaustion, of elation, of everything that was going on that year. It was
because that was something that was very interesting, because of course any other season you'd have got into, and probably what the other teams were expecting is kind of, well, what was Honda will be Honda again, and they might finish 8th, and, you know, if they sort of turn up to the first race, qualify on the back row of the grid and they're there, isn't that a success, sort of thing? But of course it wasn't that at all. And the marrying of, as you said, Norbert Haag gets involved, the Mercedes engine gets put very crudely into the back of this car that was built for a Honda engine, but it's fast. So you go to Australia and you've got this incredible situation where you win the race. And that's something, as you said, you'd gone through a number of years with Honda, and you'd had the win in 2006 in Hungary with Jenson Button, but that'd been the only real bit of success you'd seen. But suddenly you've got you know, Rubens Barrichello and Jenson Button on the podium up there with Ross Brawn, having had a very successful race weekend. Now, that's absolute elation. But why don't you talk us a little bit about what then was going on the Monday back at the factory, and what you had to go through, having had this incredible success at the weekend?
Yeah, I mean, the timing was dreadful in some respects. Yes, we got the car to the first race, which was a huge effort on everybody's part. And we knew that we had to, so basically the way UK law works is that you give notice of redundancy, and then you have a 30-day consultation period. And, you know, if it's a larger organization, you've got to give a longer consultation period. And we knew that any redundancies would have to be made by the end of March. And that was the timing of the first race. You know, we went to Melbourne, we won the first race unbelievably, and the whole team was utterly delighted. And what would ordinarily have happened is that you would come back into the factory and there would be a massive celebration, and you'd all be there with champagne, and there would be, you know, hugging and everything else going on. And what actually had happened that morning was that we all came back into the factory, and 250 people were told that they were going to be made redundant. And the whole place was shocked. And, you know, it was a really tough atmosphere as people who we'd worked with throughout the whole of the winter, and who had been with, you know, been there with us, gave us a hug and walked out the door. And yeah, we're, you know, still eternally grateful to all of those people for what they did. But it was hard. It was very hard.
And I'm sure they still felt part of it.
And they still do. Yeah, they definitely still do. You know, the people that I'm still in touch with definitely still feel part of that Brawn GP year, because they were there. They were there for the start of it. But it was a tough time. And I think, you know, had there not been another race coming 2 weeks down the line or whatever it was, that, you know, we would have dwelt on what was happening a lot more. But there was no time to, you know, when you lose almost 250 out of 750 people, you've got a lot more work coming in. You've got a lot of work to absorb. You've got to learn new things that you weren't doing before because someone else was doing them. So it was almost kind of like, okay, we just got to keep going. We've just got to keep going. We can't stop now, you know.
That's an interesting thing, and I've seen this before, where actually when you're going through big redundancy processes, you do focus on the people that are leaving, obviously, because it's a horrible situation for them. But actually, the people that are left behind, one, they've almost got this sort of guilt that they've been chosen to stay not there, and also they are taking on a lot more work, because you're whatever business you're in, you're as you say, that you've become leaner, and that's that. So
there's definitely a sense of survivor syndrome. But I think it was very much kind of like, we've got a job to do. We just get
exactly. I was going to say, what's interesting about Formula One, whereas, you know, when you look at business, Formula One's very much, well, we're off to the next race in 2 weeks' time, and the car's got to be there. Otherwise, we don't go racing. You know what success looks like, which in many respects can be just getting the car to the track in order to get some form of result.